Welcome to the While You Were Working podcast, presented by Rogue Marketing. When you're responsible for revenue, it's hard to look up from the work. But while you're doing your day job, the market shifts. While You Were Working is where we turn today's trends into tomorrow's strategies. Welcome to While You Were Working.
Welcome to While You Were Working, the podcast for revenue accountable business leaders wanting to stay ahead of the curve. I'm Chip Rosales, managing partner at Rogue Marketing. We're business builders who happen to carry a marketing toolbox, and we're so glad you've joined us. All right, here's a question. What if your biggest growth opportunity isn't finding another customer, but understanding everyone who influences that customer? Most organizations know their competitors. Fewer understand the ecosystem that surrounds every buying decision. Today's guest uses her skills to help companies see what they're missing, not only inside the sales funnel, but around it. I'm joined today by Alicia Deach, a fractional chief revenue officer who has spent more than 3 decades helping organizations solve commercial growth challenges. After a long career leading transformation inside a very large enterprise you'd know, Alicia now works across multiple organizations. While many executives become experts in one company, Alicia, she sees patterns across dozens. Now, we're just going to have to see where this is going to go today, but I'm pretty sure we're going to be talking about ecosystems, customer insights, and future of growth. So I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe I'll give you a second just to tell us a little bit about who you are, where you've come from, and then how you have found yourself into the fractional chief revenue officer space.
You know, I tended to think of myself as a marketer. It's where my heart was, my passion was. I had started in sales, I moved into marketing, and what I discovered in the last third is that the combination of sales, marketing, customer centricity pointed at growth. So really now I have the benefit of that sales experience, that marketing experience, those patterns to really work with clients and help them diagnose.
Companies, they are investing a lot in sales and marketing. They're spending a lot. Where does it break down?
It's getting the pieces connected. That is more often the gap. Yes, you have to have the sales capability. Yes, you have to have the marketing talent. Yes, you have to have the insight into the customer. But interestingly, where I find it breaks down often is in connecting all of those pieces and then connecting it inside of the company.
How has becoming a fractional CRO actually changed the way that you're diagnosing those types of problems?
I think the word I would use is freedom. And it's not that at a very large company, you're not empowered. But I think what tends to happen in a very large company without you ever intending it to is you start to work within the confines of a remit. And I find that now I have a lot more freedom to take those blinders off and look at the whole of how the company is actually operating.
Okay, so it's kind of going down that path, and let's just talk ecosystem just a little bit. Why do leaders become so internally focused that they do kind of somehow lose sight of that outside ecosystem, that customer world?
More often than not, our incentives as leaders are oriented around being internally, sometimes functionally focused. So I think it really is a very critical aspect of how a company thinks about its remit and how a company thinks about empowering its leaders and setting them free, even exposing them to how the company actually works. You know, these pieces have to all work together. And I do find that when we're motivated to drive results in our own function, it sometimes limits our ability to look outside of that and understand how to drive results more holistically for the company.
Well, I'm thinking in today's business environment, I think more than just the person that you're inviting onto your team or the product that you may be buying, you're actually buying their ecosystem. Running in the similar circles, I'm curious, how would you define ecosystem?
I've often appreciated having spent so much time on sort of B2B in my career. The fact that it's so nuanced and often very sophisticated in terms of how decisions get made and what influence really means. And to me, that's always been exciting. But when you think about how we work and how we live today, I'm going to go back to a word you used earlier, connected. Okay. We are so connected. It's easy to miss how the influencers on decisions have continued to expand.
Do you have some sort of like almost like a mental framework or some way that you think about that? I mean, data centers, we can continue to use that example. It's a great one. But like if I'm in the midst of that and I am so internally focused and I'm driven by the incentives of doing the things that I need to do, what's right for my company, or I'm a founder and, you know, this is my baby and I want to see the highest success. Like, how do I start to think about those ecosystems? And, you know, you've got media, you've got communities, you've got all these different outside influences. What's my mental model that I should start thinking about? Like, you know, if I don't have you in the chair.
What we do at its core is customer, right? And I think when we contemplate who our customer is, we need to think about that a little bit differently. I think traditionally, I know for years I probably would have described my thought process on it this way. You thought about who bought something, right? I think the mental model today is, you know, who is impacted by what I offer, who benefits from, who may see negative impact of what I bring into the world. And I think when you start to think about your customer in those kinds of terms, it gets you to a place where you start thinking about that ecosystem and you can start to think about the points of view of the people that are involved.
I wanted to go back to that 2-letter curse word, AI, that we've been talking about and kind of give you that opportunity to tell me, what are you seeing with the AI space? How are you seeing that infiltrate? What's your perspective on AI for, you know, today's business?
So it's hard to argue the amazing opportunity AI brings us. And I think there's so much we've all benefited from already, just in terms of basic tools and more efficiency we can have as individuals. I think the real crux of the challenge at the moment is how to unlock real performance improvement, real ROI inside of companies using whatever combination of AI tactics that you want to. And I think there's so much focus on the opportunity that sometimes, not always, sometimes we're running to an answer before we've really understood the problem that we're solving. Because the truth is that AI doesn't fix your problems. AI lives on top of your problems, right? It's a solution set that sits above. And if you aren't really clear on the underpinning, on the nastiness underneath, and you don't know how far you can press that by overlaying AI, then you're going to struggle. What is reassuring to me is I find now a lot more acknowledgement of that as a dynamic that needs to be addressed. I don't know that we've exactly figured out how to do it because some of these problems are problems we've had for decades. It's not a new problem. Right? So I think, you know, a combination of using AI thoughtfully for how we might solve some of those underlying problems, you know, is there some advanced modeling that could be applied to a data quality issue? Maybe. But understanding you have to start there in order to get that value is part of what I think everybody is grappling with. You know, everybody is getting their certifications. Everybody wants to lean in on it. Boards are asking about it, you know, and it presents an amazing opportunity, both for cost, you know, efficiency, and ideally revenue.
Yeah.
But But I think we probably see a little more on the cost and efficiency side today.
One of the things I'm encouraged by is that I'm actually seeing a lot of executives who, like you said, they're leaning into it, but that's not just with their words or saying I'm interested in it. They're actually literally in these platforms and actually doing things with their own hands in order to make that happen. And I'm encouraged by that. I also wonder though, like, I think your hypothesis might be that AI is a really good pattern recognizer. Maybe can identify some of those patterns that we're just not seeing or that we should pay attention to, and then figure out how we put our human premium intelligence on that.
It is one of its very best superpowers.
100%.
Is finding patterns in data of all sort. Whether that is opportunity to drive efficiency or whether that is opportunity to drive revenue, whether it is observing customer behavior and how they are engaging with what you're bringing to the market.
We're definitely in experimental mode. We're still in that era, if you will, but then we obviously want to see it to get to commercialization.
Yep.
What has to happen between experimentation and commercialization as far as AI is concerned?
Yeah, so I think, one, being really clear on the problem you're solving. I think a lot of times I still find people who are experimenting sort of just expanding the aperture for the experiment, right? Without a really clear problem of what you're trying to solve. I think once you are clear on that problem, I do think it's building some structure around it. The beauty, the upside and downside of AI is it's very accessible. You said it yourself. I mean, we can all put hands on, and you don't need to code, and you can accomplish things that were never before possible, right? That makes it great and potentially really powerful. It also makes it very fractured and not really having a center of gravity if left to its own devices. So I think problem organization around the problem, I think some governance around the problem, and I want to come back to a word you used, which is judgment. Getting clear on where the judgment comes from in your organization, because I think we all probably agree that this is a world where AI and humans, done well, are working collaboratively together, because there are things humans bring to the equation that AI does not today, right? And, knowing where that judgment belongs and who is providing it is a really important part that as everybody starts to build their framework for how to think about AI in their organization, I think is an important component.
We're all being able to use these same tools, which makes them advantageous in one sense, but also table stakes on a different hand.
And can be dangerous.
100%. We're renting intelligence that our competitors can also rent. So it's a very,
don't even get me started on the security.
100%. Yeah, that's its own beast.
There's a lot.
So much
for industry to figure out as we move towards commercializing the impact, driving real ROI.
But I think something that we can all do today is ensure that we're actually asking the question that we want to be asking. And I think if we can get to that point, and that's a human trait, that's something that we should be very good at. Get the right people in a room, have points of view, and ensure that the question we think we're answering is the question we really wanted to be answering.
Right.
I really like that. I wanted to kind of leave us on a future casting perspective. You get the chance to be able to drive vision and to help some of that for companies. So if you could teach every executive one mindset, what would it be?
I'm going to bring it back a little bit to Back to the Future, I guess.
Seems appropriate.
I've been thinking a lot about is, we talked about it, how connected organizations are, but how often they are not. And this idea of enterprise thinking beyond your function and unlocking your organization to think beyond their functions, to drive outcomes at a company level is so, so powerful.
Is better data or better questions a better growth driver?
Better questions.
If I asked 10 CROs to map their buying ecosystem, how many do you think could actually do it?
2,
What's your most overrated KPI?
leads.
Okay, how about what's the most underrated KPI?
Cost to generate $1 of revenue.
How about a leadership habit that every CRO should have?
Active learning at least once a day. Go learn one new thing.
And my last one, a book, a podcast, a resource, something you swear by.
There is a book called Halftime that is really about as you reach a point in your life and your career, how you ground the second half in things that matter.
I haven't read that, but that's right up my alley as well too. So I thank you so much for being here. Thanks for spending time with me and our audience.
Thank you.
Today's conversation centered on one big idea. Companies often think too narrowly about who influences a buying decision. That reminded me of a couple research pieces from McKinsey and Forrester on ecosystem strategy that I thought it was worth highlighting. McKinsey argues that businesses are no longer competing company versus company, they're increasingly competing ecosystem versus ecosystem. In other words, customers aren't just evaluating your product, they're evaluating the partners you work with, the technologies you integrate with, and the consultants they trust, and obviously the overall experience surrounding your solution. So 3 ideas stood out to me. First, your competitive advantage may not come from building more capabilities yourself. It might come from building better partnerships. Second, growth leaders need to spend as much time mapping who influences the buying decision as they do the buyer themselves. And third, the companies that intentionally build ecosystems are creating value that's difficult for competitors to copy. So I wonder, who is influencing your customer long before your team ever gets invited to the conversation? If you don't know the answer, that just might be your biggest growth opportunity. All right, so links to these articles are posted in the show notes. We'd invite you to follow us on social media. Search Rogue Marketing on Facebook and X, or Rogue Marketing Agency on LinkedIn. We're regularly sharing insights and articles that you might have missed, while you were working. See you next time.